Well, there it is. Focal Spectrum, my first beer using advanced hop products. And honestly, for this sort of style, it's been an absolute game changer. So this is the beer that I teamed up with James from the Malt Miller to create a recipe for, to showcase advanced hop products from Barth Haas, including Spectrum and Incognito. And as you've probably guessed, I'm pretty happy with how it's come out. But we're not going to go straight into the review just yet, because I've got some special guests joining me for that later on. For now, let's get into some brew footage, and I'll talk about some stuff about how these products went as far as the actual brew day, and integrating them into my usual processes and so on. So let's do that, and then we'll get into the tasting. So this was my first time using the Capri yeast, which is a blend of the Loki and Juice strains from Imperial. And as usual, I made a nice big starter to get it going. The grain bill on this one is pretty straightforward. You can see the full details of that in the recipe link. And as always with a New England IPA, the water chemistry is pretty important. So lots of chloride in this, but also quite a high proportion of sodium as well, which I added into the boil rather than during the mash. So this one was targeted at a mash temperature of 67. I slightly undershot that, but not by enough to be worried about it. pH was coming in pretty much on target of 5.3, with the addition of a little bit of phosphorus to hit that. So the Spectrum and Incognito were Citra, and we were using the Pure Hop Pellets in mosaic form for the hop additions. And that is the salt or sodium going in just at the start of the boil. So don't add your maltodextrin like this. It's much better to dissolve it before you add it in, so you don't have to then stir it constantly to try and avoid it clumping and scorching on the bottom. As you can see, for a NEIPA, the actual quantity of hop pellets going in here was not that much, obviously due to using the Incognito instead. And as per usual, whirlpooling at about 80 degrees for 20 minutes. And you can see that's when the majority of those hop pellets were going in, as well as the Incognito, which I didn't remember to heat up. So you can see here it's a little bit thicker, but it didn't make too much difference. It just took a little bit longer to get out the packet. And yeah, once it was mixed in the whirlpool, it dissolved and disappeared into the work without any issues or residue or any other sort of leftovers from that. Numbers wise, I came in a little bit under with the gravity, but in the end the yeast attenuated down a little bit lower than expected as well, so I'd still actually hit the target ABV of 6.8%. We're fermenting at 23 degrees, so the temperature range is a little bit higher with this yeast, probably down to it including a quite strain in the blend. And with the Spectrum, I did remember to actually heat it up this time, as you can see here. And it poured in a lot easier because of that. So this was still during active fermentation. And once that fermentation had finished, I think we were about 10-17 here at the end, I then added in the second dry hop addition of the mosaic, or the remaining mosaic pellets. And that was done at a temperature of 14 degrees. Left that for another day or two and then cold crashed. You can see here with the pure hop pellets, you get this really cool kind of cascading effect when they're dissolving into the beer or breaking up on the top. Close transfer, of course, to avoid any chance of oxygen getting into the beer. And I managed to fill the keg absolutely up to the brim, and then also managed to get a little bit extra out of the FV at the end.
So the yield with this was really good.
So now you've seen the beer being made, let's get Stiffo and Rakey from the malt miller in to get a second opinion on how this one's tasting.
Okay, so it's my great pleasure to welcome back not one, but two legends from the malt miller. So we've got Stiffo and Rakey, who have come back to basically have a taster of the Focal Spectrum beer and talk a little bit about how the brew went and how the beer came out, most importantly. So yeah, let's get into it. Thanks for joining me again, guys.
Rich, first of all, thanks for sending us some of the beer. We've got a bottle here. We're really looking forward to cracking it open and hearing about how the brew day went and what your thoughts are on the finished product.
Yeah, I can't wait to taste this. You've spoken a lot about this since you did the video with Rich, so yeah, I'm ready.
Yeah, it's an exciting recipe, isn't it?
Well, should we do that then? Let's get that bottle cracked and see what you think about the beer.
Right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Oh, nice hiss. Bit of smoke.
Is that your Simon impression?
Yeah. Oh, should probably lift that up, shouldn't I? There we go. One for you.
Thank you very much.
So it's good to see that you guys are on speaking terms after the frankly brutal encounter on your challenge video.
I know Martin's still licking his wounds.
Not licking my wounds, I'm planning my revenge.
There may be more to come on that front.
Definitely.
So,
Right.
what are we thinking, guys?
First off, appearance. It looks absolutely stunning. Nice rocky head that is really well carbonated. The haze on it, I think, is absolutely spot on. Having tried the inspiration for this beer in the past, Focal Banger by The Alchemist, whilst it is a hazy beer, it isn't like thick, real dank, like foggy haze to it. And this has absolutely got that same kind of appearance. Colour's fantastic as well. What do you think on the appearance, Martin?
Yeah, I mean, the minute you open that bottle, I could just smell Citra Mosaic.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
And the aroma is really heady. You're getting that, there's real sort of like nice, light lemon and lime top notes from the Citra, but underneath it, there's this blanket of dankness from the Mosaic, which is just off the chart.
When did you bottle this, Rich?
So this has been in the bottle. So the one that went to you must have been bottled a couple of weeks ago.
And that was from keg.
In total, it's been in the keg for just over 3 weeks now. So it's pretty fresh. Pretty fresh.
Yeah. I'm going in.
Yeah, I think you used the term heady quite a bit when we were talking through the recipe, and I think that's a really good description for kind of how the aroma's presented on this beer for me, because it is just.
I'm sorry,
yeah,
Richard. Shush, a moment, please.
Cutting in.
This is absolutely stunning. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I've got a
that's
wax
absolutely
lyrical
fine.
about
If you're telling me that the beer's stunning, that's all right. I'd be upset if you were telling me it tasted awful. But yeah, that's really good to hear, because I was really pleased with how this beer came out. But it's always, you always doubt yourself a little bit until you get that kind of, second opinion from people and get other people to try it. So yeah, I really appreciate that.
That tastes as good as it smells, mate. That's absolutely banging.
It's right. So let's get a little bit more descriptive on this. There's a really nice body to it. It isn't too thick and clawing, right? But for a 6.8% IPA, there's enough residual sweetness to it as well, which I think that was part of the malt bill, which I'm sure we'll get onto, when we talk about it in a bit more detail. The carbonation level is perfect and the bitterness is perfect. It really, whilst there's a bit of sweetness there, it cleans it up and you just want to go back for another mouthful. In terms of the flavor, I mean, it's just Citra Mosaic, isn't it? But absolutely to the max. Go on, Martin, give us a bit of...
That body and the head is just really delicious. It's like Jim says, it's not cloying. It's really fresh. There's a great balance of bitterness in there. Because as you'll have seen from our video, I like a bitterness on my New England IPA, just like Focal Banger. So I don't know the exact recipe on this or what you've used where in terms of kettle, whirlpool, and dry hop. I'd be really interested to understand a bit about that.
Yeah, so should we just do a quick run through of the recipe? The obviously the kit for this is available on the Malt Miller, so you can go and look at it there and maybe even buy it as well. And there will be a link to the Brewfather version of that recipe as well. So the grist, we've got 4 kilos of extra pale and a couple of kilos of lager malt in there as well, and then a big whack of malted oats. So we've got a kilo of the malted oats in there. So it's pretty straightforward, really, as far as the grain bill. There's a half a kilo of maltodextrin in there as well. But I think the oats are just helping to hold that sort of haze in it, but without it turning too much of a murk bomb, like you were saying before. So
what maltster did you use? Did you use a specific maltster? Or is
so it's crisp, extra pale, and I think the lager, the malted oats were crisp as well. Lager malt was Simpson's, so that's what we've got.
It's really interesting you use the malted oats, which is what you used in your recipe when we brewed.
That's what you get in Focal Banger, is they are using malted oats.
Yeah, and actually, you're right. I think that's a key marker for the haze in here, because it isn't like I said earlier, thick, cloudy. You can't see through it. There is a little bit more clarity to it, which I think you get from malted oats. They don't necessarily have quite as much in the way of that residual haze left in the beer. It's quite a unique characteristic.
Yeah, it seems to have stayed fairly stable in this beer as well. It's not sort of gone from super murky to this now after a few weeks in the keg. This seems to be pretty much as it was when it was first done. So it's it's good sort of haze stability on it as well, which I'm quite pleased with.
Sorry, tell us the hopping regime, Rich.
Yeah, so getting into the hops, we used a kind of combination of a little bit of normal T90, some Pure Hop Mosaic pellets, and then obviously we had the Citra Incognito and Spectrum going in as well, which was what we were really looking to kind of showcase in this beer. So we did have a little bit late in the boil. So I had 25 grams of the Citra and the Mosaic at 5 minutes. And I think that just helped to give a little bit of like baseline bitterness, which I think when you're talking about that, bitterness that is there to balance the sweetness from the grist, we're getting a little bit of that from the, it's not much, but it's just enough there, I think, to bring those IBUs up a touch. And then in the whirlpool, so we did 20 minutes at 80 degrees C. We've got 75 grams of the Mosaic Pure Hops and another 25 grams of the Citra T90s. And then we've got the Citra Incognito going in there. So a full packet of that, which is 16 grams, right? That's and then that will be kind of equivalent to 100 grams of hops ish.
How did you find the whirlpool process with the combination of pellets?
It was really easy to do, actually. I will admit that I actually forgot to warm the packet up. So in my excitement, I just went to sort of put it straight in and then went, oh, this is a little bit claggy. But to be honest, like, it didn't really make much difference. Obviously I just had to take a little bit longer, sort of making sure that it was all out of the packet. But once it dropped in, it was it kind of formed a little bit of an oil on the top, and I gave it a little bit of a stir, and it just disappeared into the whirlpool. I guess it, bound to the hops like we talked about in the previous video. I didn't notice any residue or stickiness on any of the equipment afterwards. So really it was super easy to use. And the main thing that I noticed about it was as soon as that Incognito hit the hot wort, the aroma was just exploding out of the kettle. I've done sort of whirlpools with traditional T90 hops with a bigger equivalent quantity and never really experienced that sort of level of aroma kicking out of the kettle straight away from that point. So, I mean, for me, I think that was the first indicator to me, okay, you're getting a really good, impact from this product as far as the aroma in the whirlpool at that stage.
And how long did you leave the whirlpool on before you started drawing off into the fermenter?
So it's I did 20-minute whirlpool, and I'm using my sort of DIY twin coil immersion chiller thing. So just dropped it down to 80 with that, which only takes about a minute or two, 20 minutes, whirlpooling with the pump the whole time. And then, just chilling straight down to that. So cooling down usually only takes less than 10 minutes for me with that. So fairly quick, but yeah, again, still got a massive impact, in my opinion, sort of flavor and aroma wise from that.
But you're talking at like a good 30 minutes contact time before you're drawing it off into the fermenter.
Yes. Yeah. In total, at least 30 minutes in there.
Awesome.
So after the whirlpool, we just had the dry hop additions there, and this was split into 2 stages. So we talked about like the impact of active fermentation on Spectrum and how that can change the kind of flavor profile from that a little bit. So according to the data sheets and stuff, sort of earlier in the fermentation tends to lean more towards fruitiness, and a little bit later, a little bit more kind of resiny or kind of piney, I guess, as a general rule of thumb. So yeah, I went for kind of, I think it was about day 2 in the end, because that yeast, by the way, kicks off like a train. I think having the quike in there as part of the mix is obviously, if I'd left it any longer, I'd have missed most of the fermentation, to be honest. So went in on day 2, and we had 30 grams of Pure Hop Pellets, and we had the 20 grams of Citra Spectrum that went in with that. And then a little bit later, so once the fermentation had actually finished up, we did another 70 grams of the Mosaic Pure Hop Pellets in there. So yeah, total of 100 grams of the Mosaic Pure Hop Pellets plus the 20 gram of Spectrum.
Yeah, nice. Excellent.
You mentioned basically there was some Kvike yeast in there. What was the yeast you were using then?
So yeah, James was very kind to send me a packet of the Capri yeast, which is that kind of combination of
the blends.
I believe it's Voss and the equivalent of London Ale Free, so what they call juice, I think. So yeah, blend of those two. But I think you can definitely tell, as far as the fermentation speed and certainly the speed that it kind of kicks off at, that the quike does kind of push that along a little bit faster than what London Ale Free would do on its own, in my experience, anyway.
Less fermentation time obviously is going to reduce some of the esters down.
Yeah,
because I'm much nice cleaner beer.
Yeah, because I'm not getting any of the sort of marmalade-y candied orange thing that you can get from those yeast strains, certainly from Voss. It's really clean, isn't it?
Yeah, I was expecting perhaps a little bit more of the yeast esters to be in there, but as you say, I think because it just burns through the fermentation so quickly, perhaps that wasn't as much of an impact. Although maybe just a little bit of a hint of orangey flavour in there. I'm not sure.
It's difficult, isn't it? Because obviously you've got the Citra there, which is bringing some of that citrus stuff to the table already.
Yeah, exactly. The Citra Mosaic sort of profile is so almost overwhelming in this beer that it would be difficult to say what the yeast is adding. But it came out really nice, so I'm pleased with that anyway, either way.
Sorry, Rich, what temperature did you ferment at?
It was relatively warm, so I think the temperature range given for that yeast is a little bit higher than what you would see. Again, that's obviously the influence of the quike yeast in there. So I went for 23 degrees, I think, with the fermentation. I'll just check that. Yeah, so it was 23 degrees that I fermented it at. And yeah, in theory, that should encourage some of the esters out of it. Like we say, I don't know quite how much of a contribution there is there from that, but it's a really good yeast either way. It was definitely performed pretty well.
It's fantastic. I think you should be incredibly proud of this. Obviously part of the process is building a recipe, and I know we worked a little bit in conjunction on that, but it was your recipe ultimately. I just gave you a few tips on how to use the hop products. But brewing a beer and fermenting it, that's where the difference can be made, because anybody can get hold of a recipe kit. If they don't think about the journey to the glass, then they're not going to end up with the best possible product. You've clearly done that, and this is an absolutely stunning beer, to the point where I think you should probably enter it in a competition next time that you brew it.
Yeah, I think it would be a good shout for going into that hazy IPA category for sure. So yeah, I may well do that. I don't think this keg is going to survive to the next competition that I'm entered in, to be honest, but it would definitely be worth a rebrew on that front. So
I'm definitely
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
You got anything that you'd change on it if you were brewing it again next time, Rich?
Would I change anything? To be honest, probably not. I might just experiment with like a different yeast or something like that, or maybe change one small element of the recipe up. But I think as far as the base, the malt bill, I'm really happy with how the body and sweetness of the beer has come out. I'm really happy with the balance with the hops and Citra and Mosaic. It's a really good showcase for those two hops together, but particularly for what Incognito, Spectrum, and Pure Hop Pellets can do in a beer as well. So, yeah, I'd use the base recipe, I think, maybe to try out different hop combinations, perhaps, or things like that. But as far as this beer, unusually, it's a beer that I'm pretty much happy with first time, first go at it. I'm really pleased with how it came out. So, yeah, I think I'd probably stick with it as it is if I wanted to rebrew this particular version.
Something that might be interesting to try would be to split the dry hop dosing of the Spectrum. So put half in during active fermentation and half in post fermentation. See if you can draw out some of the more piney resinous notes that you get from Spectrum when it's used later on in the dry hop. But also, best of both worlds, still get some of the fruitiness from the active fermentation as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's definitely a bit of experimentation there to see the different ways that you can get particular flavors or notes out of the Spectrum. It was quite interesting to see that there seemed to, be quite a range there as far as the results you can get from it, depending on where it goes in the fermentation. I mean, I assume some of that is down to, biotransformation and things like that, but there may be some elements that are particular to Spectrum as opposed to, normal hop pellets that you might not be able to get. I mean, I think the Spectrum does bring a certain flavor that you're not going to recreate with an equivalent amount of hops, T90 hops, probably down to the lower level of vegetal material in there and things like that. And it's one of the things that I wanted to particularly point out with this was, for me, one of the biggest impacts of using those products was that lack of kind of initial greenness or hop burn on this beer. Before we started, I mentioned to you that I got a fairly good yield off of this. So normally with a brew like this, even if I'm doing a 23-litre batch, for the equivalent amount of hop pellets that have gone into this, I'd probably struggle to fill a whole keg, once you've accounted for all your losses. In this case, I got the whole keg brimmed, and then there was another roughly 1.5 litres came out, which I just put into a pop bottle, force carbed it. Didn't think that it would be, particularly nice, but as you do, you kind of go, okay, well, I'll give this a try and see how the beer's coming out. And I was blown away by how decent, not just decent, but, really drinkable it was straight out. And that was the dregs out of the FV, which normally, you'd be expecting to be full of hot particulate, pretty raw, and often a little bit unpleasant to drink. But in this case, I think I've basically put away that 1.5 litres that evening and thoroughly enjoyed it. So I don't know if you guys got a similar experience from using, Spectrum and Incognito, whether you've noticed that. Because obviously it increases the yield, but I think it also reduces the wastage a little bit, because you're not kind of slinging those first couple of pints or whatever because they're full of sludge or a bit too green tasting. Have you noticed that as well?
There's a lot less that's going to drop out from suspension while it's sitting in that keg. So that first point you pour off, and that last one you get, and the clean down of the keg also is going to be a lot easier.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, in the project that Rakey and I just did, where we both brewed beers, I used Incognito and the Whirlpool, and actually it made a big difference to my yield from the kettle into the fermenter, because it was a equivalent of 100 grams, and that's easily getting on for a pint, if not a bit more, of absorption. So that for me is the big benefit of these, plus the repeatability of it, because they are going to be true to type flavors that you get from these products. So if you want to brew it again, you haven't got to account for differences in alpha acid or harvest year. So it's a fantastic product if you want to be repeatable as well.
I mean, I know I kind of touched on it earlier. If you'd make any changes, I mean, I would really like to see you kind of develop this recipe a bit further forward. I'd love to see a Citra Galaxy version, that kind of like, because that you'll have that true to type Galaxy flavor. You won't have the whole swing you get with Galaxy from season to season. You'll have true to type experience.
Yes.
There's many great Citra Galaxy beers out there.
That's a really good point, actually. And you're taking out that issue with, the potential excessive bitterness or, greenness that you do get sometimes with Galaxy. Yeah, and obviously that is available as Incognito and Spectrum as well, right? That's one of the varieties that you've got. Yeah. Okay. I'll add that to the list.
Awesome. Yeah, you've done a fantastic job and you should be really proud of the beer. It's stunning.
Well, thank you very much, guys. I really appreciate your feedback on it, and obviously, helping me out with the opportunity to actually make the beer in the first place with some of the products that you've helped me out with and everything. So, yeah, thank you very much.
If you're struggling to finish that keg, Rich, stick some more in bottles and send it down here, please.
I don't think there'll be a problem with it helping you finish it off.
Last of that, thanks, James.
Brilliant. All right, cheers, guys.
Thank you.
And look forward to seeing some more videos from you two as well soon.
Teach him another lesson.
So just a couple of final thoughts from me on this beer and the products that have gone into it. I couldn't really be happier with how this has come out, considering it was the first time that I've used these products, particularly the Incognito and Spectrum. And I was a little bit skeptical, to be honest, at first about these. I wasn't sure whether they were really necessary in a kind of homebrew context or whether they represented good value for money, because they are sort of premium priced products. But as you've heard earlier in the video, the advantages that these give you, and particularly in this sort of beer, so if you're going for a big, hazy, juicy kind of IPA or pale ale like this, getting rid of the issues around, sort of hop burn and greenness and vegetal material from the hops, for me, has probably been the biggest difference that I've seen through using these. And the impact of them flavor wise, I think in a homebrew context, actually, you're probably getting an even better kind of equivalent rate of hopping because of the differences in kind of utilization that you might see on the smaller scale. So I think perhaps at a homebrew level, you're probably getting an even, bigger bang for your buck than you would in the commercial scale. So yes, these products can be a little bit expensive, and particularly for a recipe like this, it might push up the price of the brew overall. But personally, I think the results in this case are well worth it. And to me, it's almost like accessing a kind of cheat code to get the kind of flavor and hop expression that you see in commercial beers, and that personally, sometimes in the past, using like standard T90s, it's been a little bit of a struggle to emulate. So yeah, doesn't necessarily have to be in a big beer like this, but I would suggest giving these a go, try them out, see how they work for you. I think they're great, and I'm definitely a convert to these. So yeah, go and check them out on the Malt Miller website. And if you fancy it, I do highly recommend having a go at this recipe, which is available as a kit as well. So any questions, let us know in the comments, and tell me what you think about these if you've used them yourselves as well. Cheers, everyone.
I'm the dude, so that's what you call me, that or his dudeness or duder or, El Duderino if you're not into the whole brevity thing.